The day our son asked us to sign the papers, he smiled the same way he used to when he was 5 years old and wanted something he knew he shouldn't have. That smile was the first thing that told me we were about to lose more than just our house. My name is Robert Hale, and my wife beside me is Eleanor Hale. We are both in our late 70s now, living quiet lives in Northern Virginia, but this story didn't begin in old age. It began decades earlier, with love, ambition, and the kind of trust parents place in their only child without ever imagining it could be used against them. We are telling this story together because neither of us could carry it alone. What happened to us was legal. It was clean on paper. And it was devastating in every way that matters. I worked for 42 years as a civil engineer for a federal contractor. I started as a junior draftsman in the late 70s and retired as a project director. Eleanor was a public school librarian, the kind who remembered every child's name and what book they borrowed last. We weren't wealthy in the flashy sense, but we were disciplined. We paid off our mortgage early. We invested carefully. By the time we retired, our home was worth just over $1 million, and our savings, pensions, and investments gave us a comfortable, dignified life. Most of it, we always believed, would someday belong to our son, Michael. Michael was born in 1983, the center of our world. We raised him with structure and affection. He never wanted for anything essential, and we tried not to spoil him, though looking back, we wonder if love itself can sometimes become excess. He went to good schools, earned a business degree, and later an MBA. He married young, divorced quietly, and moved closer to us again in his 40s, saying he wanted to be there as we aged. We believed him. God help us, we believed him. It started with concern. Michael noticed Eleanor forgetting appointments, misplacing her glasses. He asked questions about our bills, our will, our accounts. He framed everything as protection. He talked about scams targeting seniors, about probate delays, about taxes. He spoke fluently, confidently, the way men with business degrees learn to do. When he suggested we transfer the house into a trust he would manage, it sounded responsible. When he asked to be added as a joint account holder, just in case, it sounded loving. We signed the first documents at our kitchen table. At first, nothing changed. Michael checked in often. He took over paying utilities online. He insisted on consolidating our accounts, for simplicity. He even hired a financial advisor. His advisor, who spoke to us politely but always looked at Michael when decisions were discussed. Eleanor once asked why her pension deposit was delayed by a day, and Michael laughed it off as a processing issue. Then the changes came faster. We received fewer bank statements. When we asked, Michael said everything was digital now. Our credit cards stopped working one afternoon at a grocery store. Michael said he had frozen them temporarily because of suspicious activity. He promised to fix it. He didn't. Instead, he gave us a prepaid debit card with a weekly limit, like an allowance. The house stopped feeling like ours. One morning, Michael informed us he had refinanced the property to unlock equity for investment. He hadn't asked. He hadn't explained. The loan was in the trust's name, which he controlled. The money never came back to us. Later, we learned it funded a startup he was involved in, one that failed within 18 months. The moment of clarity came quietly. Eleanor tried to schedule a doctor's appointment and was told her insurance had been changed. Downgraded. We sat at the kitchen table that night, the same place we'd signed those first papers, and for the first time said the words out loud, our son had taken over our lives. When we confronted him, Michael didn't shout. He didn't apologize. He told us we were overreacting. He reminded us how much he'd done, how much stress we'd caused him, how expensive it was to care for aging parents. He used words like efficiency and responsibility. He told us the house was no longer practical for us and suggested assisted living. That was when Eleanor cried. And that was when something in me hardened. What Michael didn't know, what he never bothered to check, was that I had spent my career reading contracts, spotting flaws, and planning for worst-case scenarios. Years earlier, before any trust existed, we had established a secondary estate plan with a separate attorney, a woman named Patricia Monroe, recommended by a colleague. Michael wasn't aware of her. He wasn't listed on every asset. And Eleanor, gentle as she is, had kept meticulous records. We called Patricia the next morning. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked us to bring everything. Statements, emails, trust documents, loan records. It took weeks. Michael controlled access to many accounts, but the law leaves trails everywhere. And Michael had made one fatal mistake: he believed legality meant immunity. What he had done skirted elder financial abuse statutes in Virginia. Not criminally blatant, but civilly actionable. The refinancing violated fiduciary duty. The allowance constituted financial coercion. The insurance changes were unauthorized. Piece by piece, Patricia assembled a case. We didn't tell Michael. Instead, we played the role he had assigned us. Confused. Dependent. Grateful. Eleanor thanked him for the debit card. I asked him to explain things again slowly, pretending not to understand. He grew confident. Careless. 3 months later, Michael was served papers at his office. We sued him for breach of fiduciary duty, undue influence, and financial exploitation of elders. The trust was frozen. The house refinancing was challenged. The failed startup investment became evidence, not ambition. His accounts were subpoenaed. His advisor distanced himself immediately. Michael came to us furious, demanding explanations. For the first time in years, we looked at him without fear. We didn't raise our voices. We didn't insult him. We simply told him the truth: he had mistaken our aging for weakness, and our love for blindness. The case took a year. In the end, the court ruled in our favor. Control of the trust was removed from Michael. The refinancing was reversed through restitution. Legal fees came out of his share of the estate. A permanent protective order barred him from managing any of our finances again. He didn't go to prison. That wasn't the point. The lesson came later, when Michael realized what remained. He lost access to the inheritance he'd rushed to claim. His professional reputation suffered quietly but permanently. And when we updated our will, with clear minds and steady hands, we redirected what was left, not out of spite, but out of principle. We now live in a smaller home, one we chose ourselves. Our bills are ours again. Our lives are quieter, but they are our own. This is not a story about hatred. It is a story about boundaries, about dignity, and about the truth that age does not erase wisdom. If you are listening to this and thinking it couldn't happen to you, we once thought the same. After the court ruling, people assumed the worst was over for us. Friends said things like, "At least you got your money back," or, "At least justice worked." But justice is not a clean ending when it involves your child. It lingers. It sits at the breakfast table. It follows you into quiet rooms. Michael was no longer in control of our finances, but he was still our son, and the damage he had done reached far beyond bank accounts and court orders. For a while, Michael disappeared. No calls. No visits. No angry messages. Just silence. Patricia warned us this was typical. When financial leverage disappears, so does false devotion. Eleanor tried to stay strong, but I could see the weight of it in her shoulders, the way she folded laundry slower, the way she reread old birthday cards from him as if searching for a version of our son that still existed somewhere. I felt anger, yes, but more than that I felt responsibility. I had taught Michael how to think strategically. I had praised his ambition. Somewhere along the way, he learned that people were assets, not obligations. 6 months after the ruling, Michael resurfaced, not with an apology, but with need. His business prospects had dried up. Word had spread quietly in professional circles that he had been removed as trustee for elder financial abuse. No headlines, no scandal, just enough truth to make potential partners cautious. He asked to meet. Neutral ground, he said. Coffee. We agreed, against our better judgment, because closure sometimes looks like curiosity. He arrived late and defensive. He talked quickly, circling around accountability like it was a legal technicality rather than a moral failure. He said the lawsuit had ruined his momentum, that people misunderstood what had happened, that we had overreacted. He framed himself as a victim of bureaucracy and old-fashioned thinking. When Eleanor asked him why he never once asked if we were scared, his eyes hardened. He said fear was inevitable in aging and that he had simply taken control. That sentence settled everything for me. Taken control. Not helped. Not supported. Controlled. We told him calmly that the relationship he wanted no longer existed. That trust, once violated, does not reset because blood demands it. We told him the estate plan had been finalized and that his role in it had changed permanently. He laughed at first, then demanded details. We gave him none. He left angry, but beneath the anger was panic, and panic is the sound of entitlement realizing it has limits. What Michael didn't know yet was that the court ruling had opened doors he never expected. Elder advocacy groups contacted us after public records reflected the case. We spoke privately to a legal seminar about financial coercion within families. Not publicly, not emotionally, just factually. Eleanor explained how subtle the shift had been. I explained the documents, the trust language, the mechanisms that made abuse look like management. Our story became educational material. Anonymous. Precise. Effective. Michael began to understand that his actions had consequences that could not be negotiated away. A year later, Eleanor suffered a minor stroke. She recovered well, but the event forced clarity. We reviewed everything again: powers of attorney, medical directives, beneficiaries. This time, there was no confusion, no overlapping authority, no room for interpretation. Our assets were structured to fund our care first, charities second, and family last, and only under strict conditions. Michael's share was placed in a spendthrift trust, inaccessible without oversight, unreachable by pressure or persuasion. When Michael found out, he accused us of punishment. He said we were using money to control him now. The irony would have been laughable if it hadn't been tragic. I told him something I wish I had said years earlier: money does not control people, entitlement does. And entitlement, once fed, always comes back hungry. The final lesson did not come from us directly. It came when Michael tried, unsuccessfully, to contest the estate plan. Patricia dismantled his challenge in weeks. The court reaffirmed our autonomy, our competence, our right to protect ourselves from our own child if necessary. The judge's words were careful but firm. Age does not negate agency. Parenthood does not require self-destruction. Michael stopped fighting after that. Not because he understood, but because there was nothing left to take. Today, our lives are quieter and smaller, but they are honest. We manage our own money. We choose our own doctors. We decide who sits at our table. Michael exists at the edge of our story now, a caution rather than a presence. We don't celebrate his absence, but we no longer fear his influence. If there is a lesson here, it is not about revenge. It is about preparedness. About the uncomfortable truth that love does not replace legal clarity, and that the most dangerous betrayals rarely arrive with cruelty, they arrive with smiles, paperwork, and promises to help. The months after Eleanor's stroke slowed time in a way we had never experienced before. Days stretched, not with drama, but with awareness. Every pill, every appointment, every walk down the block felt deliberate, chosen, and that in itself was a kind of victory. For years, Michael had framed control as care. Now we understood the difference intimately. Care listens. Control decides. As Eleanor regained her strength, we regained something else as well. The confidence to live without anticipating interference. We began restructuring more than finances. Our social circle had shrunk during the years Michael managed our affairs, not intentionally, but subtly. Invitations had gone unanswered because he filtered our emails. Phone calls were returned late because he said they were scams or unnecessary distractions. Now, we reached out again. Old neighbors. Former colleagues. A retired couple from our church we hadn't seen in years. We told them the truth without drama, and we were surprised how many responded with stories of their own, children who helped too much, relatives who confused access with entitlement. It was then we realized our experience was not rare. It was simply underreported. Michael, meanwhile, was unraveling in ways he didn't understand. He had built his identity on competence and forward motion. Losing legal authority over us forced him to confront how much of his confidence had been borrowed from power rather than earned through trust. His attempts to re-establish himself professionally became increasingly erratic. He chased short-term consulting roles, pitched vague investment ideas, leaned on contacts who no longer returned calls. The quiet reputational damage from the lawsuit had settled in. No one accused him openly, but no one vouched for him either. In professional America, silence is often the loudest verdict. He tried another angle. He began telling extended family that we had been manipulated by lawyers, that age had made us paranoid, that the court didn't understand family dynamics. A cousin called Eleanor once, gently asking if we were okay. Eleanor thanked her for the concern and explained, calmly and clearly, what had happened. The call ended awkwardly, but afterward the gossip stopped. Truth has a way of exhausting rumor when it is consistent. Around this time, we made a decision that surprised even Patricia. We sold the original family home. Not because we were forced to, but because it carried too many echoes of dependency and quiet fear. We bought a smaller townhouse near a park, all on one level, manageable and bright. The day we moved in, Eleanor insisted on opening every window. She said she wanted the air to feel earned. I understood exactly what she meant. Michael reacted badly to the sale. He accused us of destroying his future security, as if the house had always been his by default. That was the moment I finally saw him not as a failed caretaker, but as a man who had confused inheritance with income. I told him something then that I had been holding back for decades, that inheritance is not a reward for being born, but a reflection of relationship, responsibility, and restraint. He didn't respond. He simply stared, as if encountering a language he had never learned. The legal consequences of his actions continued to ripple outward. The failed startup he had funded using our home equity was under investigation for misrepresentation. His name appeared in documents as a primary backer. Nothing criminal, but enough to make lenders cautious. His credit tightened. Lines of capital closed. The very systems he once navigated confidently now treated him with polite skepticism. This was not revenge. It was alignment. Systems correcting for misuse. Eleanor and I, in contrast, found ourselves strangely lighter. We volunteered with a local elder support nonprofit, speaking to small groups about financial autonomy. Not as victims, but as witnesses. We emphasized planning, documentation, and the danger of informal arrangements. People listened. Some cried. Others took notes furiously. We never used Michael's name. This was not about him anymore. Years passed. Michael aged faster than we did, not physically, but emotionally. When we saw him at a distant relative's funeral, his posture was tight, his conversations transactional. He asked after our health with rehearsed politeness. There was no warmth left to exploit, and so he didn't try. We spoke briefly, respectfully, like strangers with shared history. That was perhaps the most painful outcome of all, not anger, but irrelevance. As we approached our 80s, we reviewed our plans one final time. Everything was in order. Medical directives clear. Financial protections layered. Beneficiaries chosen with intention. We added one final clause, a letter, written in our own words, to be delivered after our passing. Not as an apology. Not as accusation. Simply an explanation. A record. We wanted our truth to exist independently of memory or reinterpretation. Writing that letter took weeks. Eleanor wrote slowly, deliberately. I edited nothing. When she finished, she handed it to me and said she felt done. Not defeated. Finished. Michael never apologized. But he stopped demanding. He stopped explaining. He stopped orbiting our lives looking for leverage. In the end, that was the lesson we had hoped he would learn, not obedience, not guilt, but distance. The understanding that some bridges collapse not from neglect, but from too much weight placed on them. We do not tell this story with bitterness. We tell it because aging does not mean surrender, and because family betrayal is most dangerous when it hides behind good intentions and legal paperwork. If you are listening to this, know this: the law can protect you, but only if you prepare. Love is not a safeguard. Clarity is. Time has a way of sanding down sharp memories, but it also polishes the truths that matter. By the time Eleanor and I crossed into our 80s, we no longer woke up thinking about what Michael had done. We woke up thinking about the weather, about whether the coffee tasted stronger than usual, about which path through the park felt easiest on Eleanor's knee that morning. That, in itself, felt like a quiet triumph. The absence of fear is not dramatic, but it is profound, especially when fear once lived so comfortably in your own home. We settled into routines that were ours alone. I handled the bills with the same care I always had, double-checking figures not because I was anxious, but because attention had once saved us. Eleanor returned to reading the way she used to before everything became complicated, not skimming but savoring, lingering over sentences as if they were conversations. Occasionally, we would talk about Michael, usually prompted by something small, a photograph tucked into an old book, a story on the news about elder fraud, a question from someone who knew us only casually and assumed we were surrounded by grateful family. Each time, the conversation was brief, factual, and oddly calm. The emotional storms had already passed. What remained was understanding. Michael, on the other hand, struggled with the slow grind of consequence. Not punishment, consequence. His life did not implode in a single dramatic moment. It narrowed. Opportunities became conditional. Trust became provisional. He took a job well below his previous ambitions, consulting for a mid-sized firm that valued his technical skills but kept him far from financial authority. He rented rather than owned. He dated briefly but never long enough for anything to take root. Stability, once assumed, became elusive. We heard these things indirectly, through the family grapevine, through careful phrases like, "he's managing," or "he's figuring things out." No one said he was thriving. No one said he was happy. Once, about 5 years after the lawsuit, Michael sent a letter. Not an email, not a call. A physical letter, typed, and signed. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an accusation either. It read like a report, measured, distant, strangely hollow. He spoke about stress, about misunderstandings, about how things escalated unnecessarily. He never used the words trust, fear, or harm. Eleanor read it once and folded it neatly. She said nothing for a long time, then placed it in a drawer with other documents that no longer controlled our lives. Silence, we had learned, was sometimes the most accurate response. As our health slowly declined in the ordinary ways age demands, we leaned more heavily on systems we trusted. Home health aides came and went. Doctors spoke directly to us, not around us. Every decision had a paper trail, every authority clearly defined. There was comfort in that structure. Some might find it cold, but to us it felt respectful. It acknowledged that we were still people, not problems to be managed. We revisited the letter that would be delivered after our passing. I reread Eleanor's words many times. They were not harsh. They were precise. She explained how love had slowly been replaced by vigilance, how trust had eroded not because of a single betrayal, but because of many small dismissals. She wrote about dignity, about the quiet humiliation of being treated as incapable while still fully aware. I added a short note of my own at the end, not to argue, but to clarify one final truth, that consequences are not acts of revenge, but reflections of choice. The older we became, the more we understood that revenge is noisy and temporary, while lessons are quiet and permanent. We did not need Michael to suffer. We needed him to stop. And he had. The distance between us was not a victory parade, it was a boundary that held. When Eleanor passed, it was peaceful. She was at home, the windows open, sunlight moving slowly across the floor just as she had wanted. In the days that followed, I moved through grief with a strange steadiness. Loss, after all, was not new. I had already mourned the son I thought I had. This was different. This was love completed, not taken. The letter was delivered as planned. Michael attended the funeral, standing at the back, composed and contained. He did not approach me. I did not approach him. Later, through Patricia, I learned he had read the letter alone and requested no meeting, no clarification. Perhaps, finally, he understood that some conversations end not with reconciliation, but with record. In the months that followed, the estate was settled exactly as designed. No disputes. No delays. The systems held. I downsized once more, then eventually moved into assisted living by choice, not necessity. The staff treated me kindly. I kept my books, my papers, my routines. I spoke occasionally to groups about planning and protection, my voice slower now, but still steady. Michael faded further from my awareness, not because I forced him out, but because life naturally fills the space you defend. When I thought of him, it was without anger. It was with a sober recognition of what happens when entitlement goes unchallenged for too long. He had not been born cruel. He had learned, gradually, that control could masquerade as care, and by the time the difference mattered, he had already crossed the line. If there is a final lesson in all of this, it is not that children will betray their parents, or that parents should distrust their children. It is that love without structure invites misuse, and that dignity requires defense at every age. We protected ourselves not by hardening our hearts, but by clarifying our boundaries. And in doing so, we preserved what mattered most, the right to live our final years on our own terms. There came a point, somewhere deep into my late 80s, when memory stopped arriving in neat order. Some days the past lined itself up politely, decade by decade. Other days it came in fragments, Eleanor's laugh in the kitchen, Michael's small hand in mine crossing a busy street, the sound of a judge clearing his throat before reading a decision that would quietly change the direction of our family forever. I learned not to fight those moments. I let them pass through me, because by then I understood something important. Memory no longer had the power to hurt me the way it once did. People at the assisted living facility often asked if I had children. It's one of those questions that sounds simple until it isn't. I learned to answer carefully. I have a son, I would say, present tense, because biology does not dissolve with disappointment. If they asked more, I kept it vague. We're not close. That was enough. Most people nodded, understanding more than they said. Estrangement, I learned, is far more common in old age than anyone likes to admit. Michael never visited. That, too, told me more than any apology could have. Distance had become his chosen resolution. I did not chase it. I had spent too many years chasing peace back when it was being taken from me. Now peace came from stillness, from routine, from knowing that nothing and no one could rearrange my life without my consent. That knowledge is a powerful sedative. Occasionally, Patricia would check in, less as a lawyer and more as a steward of a story that had mattered. She told me, once, that our case was still referenced in continuing education seminars, not by name, but by pattern. Elder financial abuse carried out by competent, educated children was finally being discussed without euphemism. That pleased me more than I expected. If something good could come from our fracture, let it be clarity for someone else. Michael's life continued in a narrow lane. He never recovered the upward trajectory he once assumed was guaranteed. He worked steadily, quietly, with limits placed around him that never fully disappeared. Some people interpreted that as unfair. I did not. Trust, once broken at that level, is not rebuilt through time alone. It is rebuilt through humility, and humility had never been his strength. Once, many years later, I received a call from a hospital social worker in another state. Michael had listed me as an emergency contact, though he had not spoken to me in years. He was stable, she said. The call was procedural, not urgent. I thanked her for informing me and asked that my number be removed. When I hung up, I felt no guilt. Responsibility does not require self-erasure. That was a lesson I had learned too late in parenting, but not too late in living. As my own health waned, I prepared the way Eleanor and I always had, deliberately, transparently, without secrets. I updated documents. I simplified accounts. I donated what I could while I was still alive, preferring to see impact rather than imagine it. Control, when used ethically, is simply stewardship. That distinction mattered to me until the very end. In quiet moments, I did allow myself one form of grief I rarely spoke about. The grief of wondering who Michael might have been if we had set firmer boundaries earlier, if we had said no more often, if we had mistaken compliance for kindness less frequently. But regret, I learned, is only useful if it informs others. It has no practical value at the end of a life. Acceptance, on the other hand, is light enough to carry. When my time came, it was unremarkable in the best possible way. No conflict. No unfinished business. The estate transferred exactly as designed. The letter Eleanor and I had written years earlier did its quiet work again, not as a weapon, but as a record. Michael did not contest anything. Perhaps by then he understood that the final lesson was not about money at all, but about the cost of confusing access with authority. If someone were to ask me now what revenge looked like in this story, I would tell them there was none. Revenge seeks to injure. What we sought was protection. What followed was consequence. And consequence, when allowed to stand without interference, teaches far more effectively than anger ever could. There is a strange clarity that comes when you know you are living in the final chapter of your life. It doesn't arrive with fear the way people imagine. It arrives with selectiveness. You stop explaining yourself. You stop arguing with the past. You stop hoping people will become who they have already shown you they are not. In those last years, I was no longer trying to make sense of Michael. I was trying to make sense of myself, of the choices Eleanor and I made, and of the quiet strength it took to stand firm against someone we once would have sacrificed everything for. I spent a great deal of time alone, but not lonely. There is a difference that only age teaches you. Loneliness is absence without meaning. Solitude is presence without interference. In solitude, I revisited our life honestly. Eleanor's patience. My rigidity. The way we mistook Michael's intelligence for maturity, his confidence for character. We had given him freedom without accountability, access without oversight, affection without limits. None of that made him a villain, but it made him dangerous when power was placed in his hands. That realization no longer felt like self-blame. It felt like truth. One afternoon, a young staff member at the facility asked why I volunteered to speak to families about elder planning when it was clearly painful. I told her it wasn't painful anymore. Pain fades when it has somewhere to go. Silence keeps it alive. Speaking turned our experience into something useful, and usefulness is one of the last dignities aging affords you. When people listened, really listened, I could see recognition cross their faces. Not pity. Recognition. They had felt the same unease with a child who offered too much help, asked too many questions, pushed just a little too hard. If our story gave them permission to pause, then it mattered. Michael wrote once more, near the end. This time it was handwritten. Short. Careful. He said he hoped I was comfortable. He said he thought about Eleanor sometimes. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not ask for money. He did not ask for a meeting. It was the first time he had written without an agenda, and that alone told me something had shifted, even if it was too late to change anything meaningful between us. I did not respond. Not out of cruelty, but because the relationship had already reached its final shape. Not all realizations require acknowledgement. As my body weakened, my certainty strengthened. Eleanor and I had done the hardest thing parents can do, we had chosen long-term protection over short-term peace. We had accepted being misunderstood rather than being erased. We had allowed our son to experience the consequences of his actions without shielding him from discomfort, and in doing so, we had reclaimed our own agency. That was the lesson. Not punishment. Not victory. Agency. In the final weeks, I thought often about how stories like ours are usually told backward, framed as tragedy or betrayal. But lived forward, it did not feel like a collapse. It felt like an awakening that came late but arrived fully formed. The legal system did not save us. Preparation did. Documentation did. The courage to say no did. Love did too, but a wiser, firmer version of love than the one we had practiced before. If Michael ever truly understood what happened between us, it would not be through loss of inheritance or professional limitation. It would be through the realization that control is fragile and temporary, while dignity is stubborn and enduring. Eleanor kept hers until her final breath. I kept mine to the end. That mattered more than reconciliation ever could. When people speak about revenge, they imagine spectacle. They imagine confrontation, humiliation, dramatic reversals. What we experienced was quieter and far more lasting. We removed access. We enforced boundaries. We allowed the law to function as intended. And then we lived, peacefully, deliberately, without fear, while the person who tried to take control learned that some doors, once closed, are not meant to reopen.